Jerry to the witness table. Representative Fitzgerald, I welcome your testimony. Whoops. Wait until he sits down. Representative Fitzgerald, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify on H.R. 8205, Keeping Violent Offenders Off Our Streets Act, otherwise known as Charitable Bail Funds Bill. This bill defines the posting of a cash bail by a corporate, nonprofit, or for-profit entity as engaged in the business of insurance, which is the most important thing, subjecting them to federal insurance laws and the criminal fraud statutes, which has been the focus of the bill. The use of crowdsourcing, which is just a different way of explaining kind of the charitable bail funds, which there might be questions on. It's been scrutinized by the courts already, and I guess you could say that the concern is what is the true source of the funds. The charitable bail funds has been seen as an easy way to maybe legitimize some monies that would otherwise be rejected by the court due to its likely unknown linkage to any type of activity that would otherwise be frowned on by the court. And that's because if there is little or no relationship between the defendant and those supplying the money, the bail money provides no incentive to prevent the defendant from simply fleeing the jurisdiction, as we're all familiar with. This is especially true if the money does not have to be returned at any point. Charitable bail funds generally flew kind of under the radar, and then in 2020, with the riots that happened in Minneapolis, it ballooned because there were so many people contributing to these funds nationwide. You know, what used to be kind of community-based small organizations that help post bail for nonviolent misdemeanors has now grown into a multi-million-dollar industry. In the example that I just cited, Minnesota Freedom Fund saw revenues increase by 18,000% between 19 and 20. It went from basically hundreds of thousands of dollars to in excess of $40 million this last time around in 2020. The funds are nearly indistinguishable from crowdsource websites. So crowdsourcing is a GoFundMe page where anybody can log in and simply make a donation. There's no tracking of the dollars. That's different than what you're seeing with the charitable bail funds right now, which there is a contribution being made and there's expectations about where that money will go and how it will be used. And then the money is returned if in fact the person is done with the legal process. In 2021, for example, the Minnesota Freedom Fund released a domestic abuser back on the street. 2 weeks later, the man, George Howard, was charged with second-degree murder for a road rage incident. According to an investigation conducted in Hennepin County, Minnesota, the Minnesota Freedom Fund has bailed out at least 65 defendants who were awaiting trial on felony charges involving violence or physical threats or sex crimes. In Indiana, of the roughly 1,000 defendants released on bail supplied by the Bail Project between 2019 and 2021, 24% had previously been charged with a crime of violence. 35% were accused of felony charges and had a previous charge of at least one crime of violence. And because these funds are crowdsourced, or, you know, if they're not couched into some type of charitable bail fund, it's very difficult to track who is donating this money. According to CNN, that did an in-depth report on this, nearly 42% of the roughly 500 defendants bailed out by the Minnesota Freedom Fund later failed to appear, period. They just don't show up. So it's another dynamic, I think, that a lot of people aren't aware of once they see kind of what what some of the bail projects have been involved in, or certainly charitable bail projects. Commercial bail companies, by comparison, had a failure to appear rate of only 22% during that same period. So states that still have the bail bondsman type of system, it's a far lower amount that don't show. And this is why many states have begun regulating using charitable bail funds. Congressman, in your state of Georgia, for example, they have now limited the amount of cash bonds a charitable bail fund can pay in a given year. And like I said, in Indiana, where they had prohibited the use of charitable bail funds from posting bail for violent offenders, they now made other changes to their state statute. So there has been a state-by-state approach that probably ultimately will make a difference. But when we introduced this bill last Congress, and we made some significant changes to it since then, I think the bill makes a small but important change to our criminal code to define bail bonds as an insurance product. That's all it does. That's all we're doing here. It just identifies it as an insurance product. And this is something that came from a district attorney within my own state who said there needs to be something in place kind of nationwide to deal with this issue. So under the Federal Comprehensive Crime Act of 1994, this change would also bring charitable bail funds under state insurance regulation. So everyone has a state insurance commissioner, something similar. It's either a one-person commissioner or some type of board that oversees that. What we're simply asking for is that these, whether it be the charitable bail funds, would fall underneath that insurance commissioner, so they could oversee it and say, yes, there's issues, or we believe that everything about this charitable bail fund is on the up and up. That's all we're trying to do. The bill merely says that if you are operating as a non-for-profit with the purpose of posting cash bail, you should be subjected to the same regulation and oversight requirements as those operating as a for-profit entity. This will bring needed oversight to organizations that for years have gone unregulated now, while ensuring accountability of these funds by subjecting them to federal insurance fraud statutes. That's all this does. I know there's been other comments about the bill that people are reading further into it or making judgments about this goes too far or interferes with the state insurance program. It does not. It does not interfere with that. So I think this will bring needed oversight to the organizations that for years have gone unregulated, completely unregulated, while ensuring accountability of these funds by subjecting them to federal insurance fraud statutes if they misappropriate funds or misrepresent the use of these funds. And I yield back.
Mr. Nadler.
Mr. Chairman, H.R. 8205, the Keeping Violent Offenders Off Our Streets Act, is yet another vehicle for Republican campaign messaging that does nothing to help the American people. This bill, which would amend the federal insurance fraud statute to define, quote, the business of insurance, unquote, to include the posting of any kind of monetary bail, does nothing to address violent crime despite its title. It is simply another attempt by Republicans to claim that Democrats are soft on crime and to distract the American people from the indisputable fact that crime is down across this country and it has been down for several years. Instead of leaving state interests to the states, this bill appears to target nonprofit bail funds that try to address the clear inequities that result when people without financial means are held pending trial, simply because they cannot afford to pay the bail amounts set by the court. Nonprofit bail funds, the Minnesota Freedom Fund in particular, have become a target of Republicans recently as they desperately tried to prop up their failing presidential candidate by attacking Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. Former President Trump has repeatedly and falsely claimed that Vice President Harris donated to the Minnesota Freedom Fund and that her donation secured the release of a man who went on to commit murder. This is nothing more than another made-up story the Republican ticket has created, and that is just as false as the former president's claim that immigrants are eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio. The Minnesota Freedom Fund has confirmed that Vice President Harris has never donated to them, and that her only relationship to the fund was a 2020 tweet encouraging people to, quote, chip in if they were able, 2 years before the release of the individual who committed a murder that the Republicans baselessly blame on Vice President Harris. The majority's attempt to link this murder to the Vice President demonstrates that Republicans are willing to politicize even the most heinous crimes to serve their desperate needs. We know from experience and from actual data that when you put the political rhetoric aside, Democratic policies work to reduce crime. Homicides are down across the country. Violent crimes are down. Property crimes are down. We learned just last week that even drug overdoses are down this year substantially. And while my Republican colleagues love to criticize policies aimed at eliminating or reducing our justice system's reliance on cash bail, study after study, including a recent comprehensive study by the Brennan Center of 33 jurisdictions, shows that bail reform has not led to an increase in crime. The underlying premise of this bill, that bail policies have increased violent crime, is fatally flawed. But that is not the only problem with this legislation. Another problem is that the insurance fraud statute that this bill seeks to amend applies only to, quote, the business of insurance, close quote, that, quote, affects interstate commerce, which the posting of bail by a state or local bail fund does not do. The bill also applies to entities that post any bond, including non-criminal immigration bonds, which has nothing to do with violent crime. In fact, the provision of this bill as originally introduced that actually attempted to address violent crime was stripped from the bill in committee. All that remains is the provision relating to insurance fraud. I challenge my Republican colleagues to explain how exactly subjecting state and local bail organizations to federal insurance regulations and federal criminal penalties will reduce violent crime, when the vast majority of the bonds they post are for nonviolent crimes, and when these organizations are already regulated by their own states. My Republican colleagues like to cite individual examples of people who committed violent offenses after being bailed out by nonprofit bail funds. Each case is tragic, and our hearts go out to the victims and their families. But they won't tell you about the thousands more who received help from these funds, finished their cases, and moved on with their lives without incident. They won't tell you about people who commit crimes after being released with the help of commercial bail agents. And they will not tell you that it is a judge, not a bail fund, who decides whether to set cash bail in a given case, and if so, in what amount. Bail funds simply allow indigent defendants to obtain a release that a court has already deemed to be appropriate. We must remember that we cannot ask for or expect perfection from our bail system. What we can do is to make sure that the solutions we propose for violent crime are actually targeted to address the problem, rather than to provide sound bites for social media. There is no question that we must address the root causes of violent crime, invest in proven solutions, such as community violence intervention and drug treatment. And we must also support law enforcement with funding and other resources, rather than attacking the FBI, the ATF, and their other federal partners relentlessly. Furthermore, if we are going to subject state and local bail organizations to federal regulation, we must do so only after a hearing to explore whether increased federal regulation of bail as insurance will advance our shared goal of keeping Americans safe. Unfortunately, this bill was rushed to markup without regular order. If and when the majority decides to get serious about combating violence in America, I will gladly join them in exploring serious solutions. But this legislation is no solution at all. I urge the committee to reject this flawed legislation. I would also point out that we have in New York a rather well-known case of a defendant accused of serious felonies, released on bail pending trial, and after conviction, released on bail pending sentence. And he is still on bail. I refer, of course, to Donald Trump. I urge the committee to reject this flawed legislation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Nadler, I think it's a shame that you come in here, talking about the presidential candidates the way you do. I will tell you that we had an unethical prosecutor in the state of Georgia bring charges against him too.
Say again?
We had an unethical prosecutor bring charges against him in Georgia too.
I don't think it's been shown that prosecutor is unethical.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
You think it's appropriate for her to have an affair with someone that she hired to handle the prosecution?
I think not, but I think it didn't affect the prosecution, and I think the
come
court,
on.
and I think the judge ruled so.
You guys have hunted that man and hunted that man and hunted that man. This is the United States of America. We are not supposed to conduct
district attorney
ourselves.
in New
It's
York-
my time.
The district
This
attorney
is
in New
my
York is
time, Mr. Nadler, and I'll let you respond.
Okay.
But the Democratic Party has been on a political hunt against Donald Trump before he was ever the President of the United States. Before he was ever the President of the United States. They were tapping his phones in his campaigns and everything else. I mean, it is certainly agencies under the control of Democrats, but it is, I mean, I don't know if Kamala Harris told him to chip in or not. You said it would be Senator Harris at the time, right? You said Senator Harris encouraged him to chip in to the not-for-profit.
I assume she was senator at the time, or maybe Attorney General of California, I'm not sure.
Well, it was 2020, right?
2020, she was senator.
She was senator, right? But she was out of the presidential election already at that stage, right? She came out in 19.
Yes, I believe
Yes,
so.
she came out because she didn't make it to the actual debates and all. I thought we were prohibited from encouraging people to contribute to charities as members of Congress. I didn't think we were supposed to do that. I didn't think we were supposed to use our offices to encourage people to contribute to charities.
I'm not aware of
Did I
that
miss
at all.
something there? I think if you had an existing relationship with one before you were elected,
I think members of Congress.
look, this is
Members of
whatever.
Congress-
I'm gonna turn it over to you, Mr. McGovern. You can ask any questions you've got. I don't have.
I thank you both for being here. I'd like to get this over with. Thank you. I yield back.
Would the real chair like to ask any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just ask Ms. Fitzgerald, the monies that were raised through these charitable deductions, are they tax deductible?
Chairman, I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, it's just ironic that the 87,000 IRS agents that were created in the reconciliation bills of the last Congress now have endorsed Kamala Harris for president. This is a country that was founded on a revolt against taxation without representation, and it's just, I find it ironic that now the tax collectors are endorsing this candidate for president. So that's why I was interested as whether these were tax deductible items.
I would just offer the comment that the National Bail Fund Network recently reported there's 90 charitable bail funds across the country. So it's something that's been growing very quickly. And like I said, there is zero oversight right now over any of those dollars. So even if you're a person that donated to one of these funds, you would think that you would welcome the idea that there would be some oversight and make sure that those funds are being distributed and appropriated in an appropriate manner. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Do you know if they have to file a 990?
I don't know that. No,
They do. Okay.
they do.
Ms. Scanlon?
Yes, I'd yield to the ranking member.
No, listening to the chairman of the committee talk about taxation without representation, that's kind of rich to make that point in D.C., of all places, but I yield back.
Thank you, and I'd yield back as well.
Recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you. I think I'm going to pass as well. I mean, it is unfortunate we're spending valuable time using it in a presidential campaign, but looking forward to getting to the continuing resolution, because that's sort of what we're here to do, is fund government. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate the gentlelady's anticipation. I recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota for questions.
Thank you very much. And, you know, this is especially concerning to me because I am from Minnesota. And and we dealt with a lot of things that were going on. And in June of 2020, Vice President Harris encouraged people from around the country to donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help bail out violent protesters who had violently assaulted police officers and burn a police precinct to the ground. For my friends on the other side, who continuously bring up the protests during January 6th, let me remind you about all of the violence that we dealt with in Minneapolis in 2020. On Thursday, May 28, thousands of protesters began to surround the 3rd Precinct building, which is still empty and burned out. The mob begins throwing rocks and chunks of concrete at officers defending the perimeter of the building. Officers asked permission to use non-lethal scat rounds, which released tear gas to help disperse the mob. This request was denied. With officers still inside, the violent protesters began firing mortar and throwing Molotov cocktails at the building. The explosives finally did their work and led to the precinct going up in a blaze of fire. As officers evacuated, they found that the back gate of the precinct had been padlocked from the outside in an attempt to trap the officers inside to either burn to death or face the wrath of the mob. Thankfully, the officers were able to ram through the gate with a squad car and escape. Did any of my Democrat friends condemn this violence? I don't recall it. I don't recall them condemning that violence. Instead, Democrats like Vice President Harris called for donations to post bail for these people. And that's very, very well known all over Twitter, everything. And what was the result of all of those donations? The Minnesota Freedom Fund was able to bail out other violent offenders, some of whom went on to commit more violent crimes, including multiple people who went on to commit murder, thanks to the bail donations that Vice President Harris helped raise. Mr. Fitzgerald, can you add anything to the dangerous criminals that are being released thanks to these charitable bail funds?
Yeah, I think that the issue has been that there are so many of these bail funds now that have not only been able, I think, to forward the individual, the dollars that are needed for them to actually be released, but there's no real incentive. When you have a bail bonds outfit, I mean, that's on them. They could lose their license, certainly could be sanctioned by the courts if, in fact, somebody doesn't show up. But what's happening here is there's no accountability on the back end as well. So you've got some people that are serious offenders that are being re-released or they're being lost in the system right now. And I think that's as a result of the lack of accountability. I mean, the way it's built right now, there's very little accountability and very little incentive even for these funds to track where an individual goes after they make after the fees are paid. So.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say, like I said earlier, I am from Minnesota. This is especially important to us. This is not an election year issue for us. This is something that we had to deal with when Vice President Harris was gathering money to bail these people out who had taken down not only that precinct, but done all kinds of damage, a Target nearby, a Cub nearby, a Cub food store. And so this is something that we do need to address. And I thank Mr. Fitzgerald for bringing it forward. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Seeing no other members wishing to ask questions, this panel is now excused.